there's the guy who had the landscaping business. But anyway, he's probably a sole proprietorship. He just opened it up, said, I'm gonna call myself, landscaping business, or here's E&J Tax Service. I don't know of what you are, but, as far as a corporation or things like that, but we'll talk a little bit about that. But it's just kind of somebody, there's the landscaping guy, who says, I'm gonna start a business and this is what I'm gonna call it, and they don't go through any legality on it. It's just that, it's me, and this is what I call myself. So that's really a sole proprietorship, and in the law, it's not viewed any differently than the individual. They will report their business income on their income tax return, and, if you run over a sprinkler or a child, and somebody wants to sue you, then, they sue him individually, because this sole proprietorship is just kind of a DBA, doing business as. It's not an entity that's out there that can be sued. It's just, and I forgot what your last name was.
Bray.
Bray, Mr. Bray, doing business as Bray's Landscaping. So that's what a sole proprietorship is. It's just kind of somebody says, this is how I'm going to do business. Then you get into, that's just sole proprietor, means one owner. Then you get into two people doing business together. We heard from Mr. McDowell and
I can't even pronounce Jerry's last
I
name.
know, I was something. Okay, never mind. They decide they're going to go into business together, and it's two of them. And can't be a sole proprietorship because it's two of them, and so that's called a partnership because they're doing business together as partners. Now, do they need a formal partnership agreement? No, they can just shake hands and say, let's go in and start this business together. Now, there are some default rules, and by that I mean the legislature in its wisdom has drafted some rules about how partnerships should work if the people don't get around to drafting their own partnership agreement, and that's called, we have the Uniform Partnership Act, and that means it's very similar to acts that are in other states that deal with partnerships. But that's just two people say, hey, let's go do business together. I had a friend down the street, and I said, let's go do home staging. Wouldn't that be fun? After talking a little bit, I decided we were not business compatible, and so we didn't ever do that. But, that would just be kind of what a partnership is. Now, if you want to get into drafting a partnership agreement and kind of set out the rules of what's going to happen if you want to get out, or, we don't get along, or how are profits going to be allocated rather than 50-50, there's a presumption of 50-50. We're going to be partners, we're going to go into this halvesies. But if you want to do it differently, I'm going to put 70% in, you're going to put 30% in, and, we're going to split the profits on that basis, then you really need a partnership agreement to set up how this partnership is going to work. In a partnership, each person is liable for the partnership responsibilities, unless it's set up differently, and each person is liable for partnership debts. And so it is, not an entity to insulate you from creditors or lawsuits or anything like that. It is just an entity for doing business. A partnership does file its own income tax return, but all the profits and losses are kind of gathered together in the partnership, and then they flow out to the partners on what's called K-1s, and then you report that income on your own income tax return. So it is not an income tax paying entity, it is an income tax reporting entity, but it only reports what we're paying out to the partners so that the IRS can then track, okay, now I'm going to look at the partners returns and make sure I've got that income on there. Well, what if, somebody says, well, I don't really need you to be involved in my business. I just really want some capital. I just really want some money. Give me some money to invest in this great idea that I have, and let's be partners. But, you don't need to participate in the business. I just want your money. Well, and the person says, hey, I think you've got a great idea. I think you've got a lot of gumption. I think your business is going somewhere, and yes, I'd like to be a partner with you. Well, you can actually set up something called a limited partnership. which means that you limit the exposure of the limited partner. You can say, okay, I'm going to be the general partner and I'm going to run this business, but Ms. Evelyn here is going to be my limited partner and she's just giving me capital. And so her only exposure in that business is the money that she put in. She doesn't have any general exposure as to her personal assets because she's not really running the company. So, you know, if you want to set up a partnership that way, we have the Limited Partnership Act, but you're really going to have to specify that it is a limited partnership. And sometimes you'll see LP after the name of a business, meaning it's a limited partnership. And anybody doing business with a limited partnership needs to make sure they're doing business with the person who is the general partner, the person who's running the business, because the limited partner has no responsibility and no rights with regard to running that business in general. Again, that, you know, can be set up differently. So we've got sole proprietorship, we've got partnerships, we've got limited partnerships, and then we've got corporations. And a corporation is, has been, you know, corporations have been around a long, long time. And corporations were the way that you tried to insulate yourself from liability. You say, okay, I'm going to set up this company and we're going to put money in the company and we're going to run the company and we're going to set it up as a corporation. And a corporation is a legal entity. It actually does pay taxes. It isn't like a partnership that just reports. The corporation actually does pay taxes and is a recognized legal entity. So if once someone wants to sue the corporation for doing something, they have to literally sue the corporation. They don't sue the shareholders in the corporation. So the way the corporation works is you set it up and you say how many shares are going to be in this corporation, and then you go about selling the shares in the corporation. Some corporations are traded on the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ. Some corporations are what's called privately held. They're just, you know, kind of family corporations. But let's say I need some investment money. I say, okay, well, I'll sell you, you know, 49 shares in my corporation and you put some money in. And so again, her only exposure would be the cost of those 49 shares. And you give me that money and you say, well, you know, I think she's got a great idea. I retain control because I've got 50 shares and she's only got 49, so I can outvote her on anything. And, you know, but her exposure is only the money that she has put in the corporation. And if the corporation makes money, she gets dividends on her shares that go back to her and she pays income tax. A good thing about a corporation is that you've got limited liability because all you've got liability for is what your investment is in the corporation. The bad thing about a corporation is I told you the corporation pays tax. So you've got earnings within the corporation and the corporation is going to pay income tax. And then when it comes out as dividends, then she's going to pay income tax on that dividend. So people talk about the double taxation effect of corporations. So, you know, that was really kind of when I went to law school, the things that you had. You know, the sole proprietorship, the partnerships, and the corporation. So that was pretty much all you had. About 20 years ago, effort came about and our legislature passed what was called the Limited Liability Company Act. And it's got some parts of partnerships and some parts of corporations, and they kind of put it all together in this new entity that you often hear called an LLC, Limited Liability Company. So, you know, you think limited liability. Okay, limited liability, that's like a corporation. My liability is limited to what's in that entity. But it's kind of like a partnership in that it is not a tax-paying entity. It files a partnership return. You can elect out of filing a partnership return by checking a box and saying, I want to be taxed by a corporation. But honestly, I've never seen anybody do that. I'm not sure why you would. But, you know, an LLC does file its own return. It's like a partnership return. It's a reporting return. You got those K-1s. The income is taxed down to the members of the LLC. And that's what we're not called partners in an LLC. We're not called shareholders in an LLC. All the different people in the LLC are called members. And everybody's members. And you know, the nice thing about an LLC is it's probably the most flexible company that you could ever have. You have articles that you file with the Secretary of State to set it up, and you tell them what the name is, and is this going to be a term LLC or an indefinite LLC? In other words, you could say, okay, we want this company to last for 20 years, and after 20 years it expires. Or you can say, this is an indefinite company, and it's going to last until we decide we don't want it anymore. But you've got to tell the Secretary of State that when you set that company up. So, you know, you set up the LLC with the Secretary of State, and then they know nothing more about the company. But most people have, we talked about partnership agreements, most people have what's called an operating agreement within the LLC. How is it going to work? Who's going to be the managing member of that LLC? Who's going to make the day-to-day decisions? Sometimes you have officers within the LLC, president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, just like you do in a corporation. The IRS does require you to designate a tax matters member. In other words, if the IRS has any questions, this is the person they need to go to. I have a son, I have two sons, but I have a son who likes to invest in real estate. We've got some chairs if some people want to sit. Yeah. Who likes to invest in real estate. And he bought, you know, during the heyday of, you know, the banks would lend money to anybody. He got lots of loans and bought some houses down near the university, and he rents them out to university students. And, you know, after a bit, there came a time when the bank said, I'm sorry, you've got too many loans out there and you don't have enough income and we're not going to lend you any more money. So he came knocking on my door, as sons are wont to do, and said, hey, Mom, I've got this great deal for you. And he goes to foreclosure sales. That's his fun thing. He actually is a real estate appraiser to make money, but, you know, he does this, and he goes to foreclosure sales, and he said, I found this great deal. I think it's a great house, you know, and I said, okay, I'll go look at it with you. And it was a great house. It was a really cute, newer house in Rosewood, and I said, it's a great house. And he said, you know, I think I'm going to rent it to law students. They will be more responsible. Yeah, and after those law students moved out, there were just big holes in the backyard where the dog had been digging. We had to put in a truckload of dirt. But in any event, I said, okay, I'll be involved in that with you. You know, are we going 50-50? Well, no, I need a little more money than that. So, you know, he actually has the minority interest in this LLC. I have the majority interest because I put in more money than he did. He does get, he's the managing member. I didn't deal with bringing in the truckload of dirt to put in the backyard. The tenants are moving out. Talked to him last night, and he said, with all of his rentals, he says, I've got like 26 people moving out this weekend, and I've got 1 week to turn those houses around and get the new people in and paint and clean and stuff like that. He said the nice thing on that one is those people are going to stay another year, so I don't have to worry about that one. So I don't have to worry about that one either. But in any event, you know, we decided how we wanted to set it up. He's the managing member. He gets paid a percentage of the rentals for being the managing member, but I am the majority member. So when it comes time to sharing the profits, I get the majority of the profits and he gets less. But, you know, he's paid a fee for managing it. All that's set up in our operating agreement. You know, we kind of figured out how this was going to work, and so after about a year, he found another deal for me. So we got another LLC, so we cloned that operating agreement and have it for that same next company. So, and the nice thing about an LLC is you've got limited liability. My exposure, if something happened, you know, somebody was in the backyard and fell in one of those holes and broke their leg and sued us, my exposure is limited to my investment in the LLC. They can't come against my home. They can't come against my car. You know, it's just the limited liability of what I've got in that LLC. So you'll see, when he bought these first houses, he came to me and said, I need LLCs for them. So each one of his houses, each one of his rental units, is in a separate LLC. Now, there have been some court cases that kind of look at that limited liability of LLC and say, well, you know, if it's only a one-person LLC, which you can have, you know, we talk about the sole proprietorship kind of being the default one person, but you can have a one-person LLC. You don't have to have any other members other than yourself. You can have a single-member LLC, and yes, you have limited liability there. And normally what happens in an LLC is a creditor gets what's called a charging order. They get the ability to charge that LLC and pick up the distributions that come out to the members. You follow me there? So, you know, we talked about things flowing out to the members, whether they flow out 50-50 or, as I said, my son's, I get more of it than he does. If I had a creditor sue me, just individually, just sue me individually because I ran into them with my car, I've got an interest in this LLC, they can get, to collect on their judgment, they can get a charging order against the LLC, which means that any distributions that would have been made to me out of the LLC go to my creditor. Okay? But that's only anything that comes out of the LLC. If my son decides, you know, we can't really make any distributions this year, you know, we're probably going to have to replace the roof, we need to repaint, you know, we've got some repairs, and we're going to keep all that money in that LLC because, you know, we need to have reserves for all these things. Nothing comes out to me, so nothing goes to my creditor. So, you know, that's the beauty of an LLC, is it's only the money that comes out that can be attached by a creditor for another thing. If the LLC does something wrong, that is, again, I told you that somebody fell in the hole, then it's only the LLC itself, it did wrong, and it's only the assets in the LLC that are exposed. So you've got kind of two protections there. Protections from general creditors and protections from other creditors. So in any event, it used to be that this charging order was very much respected, even in a single member LLC. You know, so if I'm the managing member and I say I'm not going to make any distributions with my creditor over here, they were kind of out the window. But some court cases have said that, you know, in a single member LLC, you don't have any other members. And so there's nobody else that we really need to be looking out for. In other words, when in that LLC with my son, you know, a creditor can't come in and be partners with Clayton. You know, Clayton said, I didn't agree to be a partner with this creditor over here. Sorry, you're my creditor now. You know, that's not what I agreed. I agreed to be, you know, partners, so to speak, with my mom. And so, but the courts have said, well, you know, it's only one member. You're not a partner, so to speak, with anybody. And so the creditor can come in and attack this single member LLC. So keep in mind that, you know, it may provide you some protection if it's a single member, but it's not absolutely guaranteed like it would be that if it's dual members. So sometimes I'll have a person who's retired and comes in to me and says, you know, I would like to start a consulting business. You know, I learned a whole lot when I was working, and now I can be a consultant. You know, maybe I was at DHEC and I know a whole lot about environmental law, and I can be a consultant and tell people about that, what they're doing wrong and how to fix, you know, these environmental problems. And I want to set up a company, and I kind of say, okay, we'll set it up as an LLC. Do you want it as a single member, or do you want it somebody else included? And I explain to them these things, and oftentimes they'll pick their spouse. You know, let's put the spouse as a, 20% member or something like that. I'm the major member, I'm the managing member, but let's put the spouse in there so I get a little bit more of that protection that's out there for an LLC. So, we've talked about sole proprietorships, partnerships, limited partnerships, corporations, and LLCs. And you just will find more and more often that companies are being set up as LLCs because they're flexible entities. They give you the tax advantages of a partnership without the dual taxation of a corporation, and they give you the limited liability of a corporation without the burdens of the tax. So you know, you just see more and more people setting up LLCs, and if it is an LLC, it will have to have LLC after the name or somehow limited liability company in the name, so that you let everybody know that you're doing business with, that this is a limited liability company.
Just out of curiosity, I found it kind of interesting that you said that for every real estate property that your son has, he has an LLC for that particular property. Why would a particular person do that? Why would a business set their model up that particular way as opposed to putting everything on one LLC?
That's an excellent question. Because, you know, as I said, he's renting to students and he's got lots, you know, each house has 2 rental units, like an upstairs and a downstairs, generally 3 people in each, so he's got 6 people living in this one house. And, you know, he doesn't want his house across the street, you know, if something happens over here, he wants his liability to be limited to his investment in that house. He doesn't want the house across the street, or his car, or his own personal residence to be involved in anything there. So, you know, it's kind of like you're putting a box around your responsibility to these tenants and saying, my responsibility to you is limited to this house. Now, that's not to say that he couldn't lose the house if, you know, something goes wrong and somebody gets hurt. But it insulates his other
And
assets.
also protect the partner as well.
I'm not a partner in that one, but yes, it would, yes, that's true. But you see a lot of people who will set up what, you know, these different LLCs, and maybe they'll have an LLC at the top that's a holding company. And so, you know, title to the property may actually be down here, but you know, you've set this up as an LLC holding company that holds all these things, and it can be owned differently than these things down here. Some businesses, you have to do a chart to figure out who owns what and how it's owned, and then they bring in trusts, and you know, it has been extraordinarily complex for people who have oodles and oodles of money. They have, you know, oodles and oodles of business entities, and try to make it as difficult as they can for people to be able to track all the ownership to get back to them. You know, because they're ultimately up here, and so they've got all this structure going on.
Question.
How long am I talking?
Well, you fine.
Okay.
Is there a limit how many LLCs you can have?
No, there's no limit.
I
No.
can have 100.
If you wanted to,
Okay.
yeah.
Once I got the money.
Yeah, I think it's like $120 to set each one up with the
Okay.
Secretary of State. Again, that's just letting the Secretary of State know that it's out there. And you know, and if it's a single member, you know, maybe that's all you do is just set it up with the Secretary of State, and you know, you move on, because there's nobody to agree with. You know, but if it's a dual member, then you know, my recommendation is that you go to an attorney, and the attorney will represent both of you and make that clear that they represent both of you, and say, let's talk it out. How do y'all want this business to work? And so if ever there's a dispute between the two of you, that attorney's out, because that attorney represented both of you in setting this thing up and can't represent one against the other at a later point. But you know, that's good, and then the next time, if it's the same partner, as I said, you can just kind of clone the agreement, change the name, and you know, do a search and replace and change the name to this one. You know, one is Green LLC, and one is Blue LLC, and the next one's White LLC, and you know, you can do that if you want.
Partners, who's that?
I saw one more question.
That was you?
Yeah.
I have a question. I have a tire shop right down the street, Professional Tire and Radiator Service. 6 years, 2 months I've owned it. Went to the state secretary, set that up, LLC. A year and a half into the business, my dad helps me run it. He's run a bunch of tire shops, very knowledgeable, taught me everything, including mowing grass and everything else. So I said, Dad, help me run this tire shop. A year and a half into it, he said, talk to the tax guy, we're better as a C Corp. What advantages? I have seen no difference. But I run the shop. I don't do what Dad does or what the tax man does.
Yeah.
I handle all that.
I'm surprised. Did you set it up as a C Corp?
I signed the paper that
Okay.
Dad said here.
Yeah, I'm surprised that they would recommend a C Corp. Because the C Corp is exactly what we're talking about, that double taxation, the company pays tax and then you pay tax on any dividends. Now, if all the money is staying up here in the company and you're paying yourself salaries out here and you're not making distributions on your stock,
I'm
then
paid
maybe.
as an employee,
Yeah.
I'm paid as a
Yeah.
salary, I pay taxes through
Yeah,
that
yeah,
too.
yeah, that's right. So you get a W-2 from the company, you don't get a K-1 coming out of the company or dividends
Right.
on a 1099.
But if I could do an owner's draw, wouldn't that be without tax?
You don't have owner's draws, you would have dividends coming out on your shares in a C Corp. Now, there's something called an S Corp, which is taxed like a partnership, and a lot of times you'll see corporations, when, in the old days when people set up corporations for limited liability, but they want to be taxed like a partnership, they'd make the S Corp election. There are lots of restrictions on who can be shareholders in S Corp, how many shareholders you can have, you're just fine. You can't trust the shareholders in S Corp, there are restrictions on that, because the IRS, wants to make sure the S Corp was really meant to be a family corporation, and they kind of want to make sure it stays as a small corporation. So, I don't know, I'm not sure why an accountant would recommend a C Corp over an LLC. I don't see that very often. When I would recommend a C Corp over an LLC is when you're intending to go public. If you're thinking, like Jerry Zuckerberg, who did Facebook, and he's intending to go on the stock exchange and sell stock, much better to be a C Corp. Because then you've got, you can sell shares and you can still retain control, and then you get all this money coming into the corporation. That's usually when I recommend a C Corp. But again, I don't do a whole lot of this work. I represent more, individuals, mom and pop, and we may, set up an LLC for them, but, if your accountant says it should have been a C Corp, they do a lot more income tax than I do.
And it has been for 4 years and,
And work fine, so.
maybe there are other advantages.
And maybe there are, and I'm really talking about from a legal standpoint, not really from a tax standpoint. I know enough to be dangerous.
And I think this will be the last question, so we can network and talk. One of the things I get asked a lot from business owners, with partnership, is there's no contract between them, and one decide, well, I don't want to be in it no more, and there's a whole bunch of debt left in the partnership, and they just, the other partner just walk away. They always say, can I sue him for?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And that's what I'm saying, there are statutes. You remember I talked to you about you can draft your own will, but if you don't, there's a will made for you in the
Right.
legislature. Well,
Right.
that's kind of the way it is with a partnership. You can draft your own partnership agreement, but if you don't, then there's a whole, section of the South Carolina Code that talks about what the rights and liabilities are between partners and how partnerships are dissolved and how debts are resolved. So yes,
Okay.
that can happen, and they need to go to an attorney, who's knowledgeable in partnership business law, really. Yeah, so,
Yeah.
you
So that's why I
can't
ended up-
just
'cause we
say,
had
I had it,
contracts.
I'm out of here.
Yeah, because the first thing they said, but we didn't have a contract drawn together that we were partners, yeah.
That's what I'm saying, when my lady down the street that we were gonna do the
Right.
home staging business, it became quite clear that our views were not the same.
That's right.
And this was not really, while we got along, being in business together is kind of like being married. You got to make sure it's somebody you're compatible with long term. And, just because you both do real good decorating doesn't mean that you're gonna be good business partners. So,
And just to reiterate something, you basically said that you can have one person for a sole proprietor versus an LLC and also a corporation. Doesn't really make a difference, correct?
that's right.
I thought a lot of times it was governed by volume, so we never knew that.
No, not really. I mean, you can have a corporation that's owned just by, one person owns the shares. It's a lot of rigmarole for that, but you can do that.
Okay, because I know some people may have some questions for you. Thank you so
Thank you.